Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast, where guests discuss all things classical theater with your host, Nathan Winkelstein.
Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. I am your host, Nathan Winkelstein, and I am so thrilled to welcome an extraordinary director and educator to our podcast today. She is an Obie Award winner who spent 20 years as a professor and a resident director at Yale Rep before taking over as the Richard Rodgers Dean and Director of the Drama Division at Juilliard. She has directed all across the country and in New York City and served as president of the Stage Director and Choreographers Union. She is the somewhat intimidating powerhouse, Evan Yionoulis. Hi, Evan. How are you?
Hey, Nathan. How you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. It's been an interesting first 2 weeks, but let's still call it a Happy New Year. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the pod. I know you're really busy with Juilliard these days. And thank you for agreeing to want to chat about King John of all plays. That is not one I normally get asked to discuss on the podcast. So I'm very excited to talk about one of the lesser known pieces that we're going to be doing. Maybe even before we do the speech that we start with, could you tell me a little bit about like what draws you to King John, just in broad strokes, and we'll get into more detail later?
Yeah, I've loved the play for a long time, and as you say, it is rarely done, and I don't know why, because it is a great political play. The piece we're going to look at is more of the personal in the play, but the idea that England and France are fighting for their for territory, that they make deals and sell out each other and their friends, all of these, the self-interested politicians, people with power behaving badly. King John, when we think of, throwing ketchup at the walls, he is the forerunner of throwing ketchup at the walls. And there's some great powerful women in the play. So all of those things, we can talk in detail, but those are some of the initial things that drew me to it and make it seem right for our time.
That's great. I already have like 17 follow-ups to that. So I'm very excited for our podcast. Speaking of the powerful women in the play, one of those powerful women is Constance. And we've decided to use as a jumping off point for today's podcast Constance's famous "I am not mad" speech in Act 3, Scene 4, which Evan will give a read to in just a second. And Evan, could you give some context for where we are in the play for our listeners?
Yeah. So one of the great things about the play is lights up at the top of the play. King John is there with the emissary from France, and he says, okay, what the hell does France want with us? And France says, we want all these territories because you're not the rightful king. I'm just going to do a little bit of the historical because I think
it's important.
It's
Please.
Interesting. Yeah. So Queen Eleanor, who, this is not in the play, but she actually had been married to the King of France, but she didn't produce him an heir, so she came back over, and she was married to Henry II. Okay, and the other thing that I think is important to know is when we think of England, what the King of England, it was England, Ireland, and half of what we now know as France was part of Henry's territories, and he was fighting the French over that. But anyway, he had an early son, Henry, who died. He had Richard I, who was Richard the Lionhearted. And then the next son was Geoffrey, and the next son was John. And then he had daughters that were inconsequential to him. But Geoffrey, when Richard the Lionhearted was killed on one of his crusades, the next brother was Geoffrey, but Geoffrey was already dead, and he has a son named Arthur and a wife, Constance. Okay, and then the next living son of Henry II is John. So according to English and Norman law, John should be the successor. And according to Angevin laws, some French laws, Arthur, the son of the older brother, should be king. And Arthur's a boy at this time. So the King of France takes the part of Arthur. Arthur's right, and John and his mother say, John's right. And there's this whole wonderful thing that Eleanor says. I'm sorry, I know we're.
Oh, you're great.
So I'm back to the French ambassador. He's come and he says, give us these territories or we'll have war. And John says, okay, we'll have war. And Eleanor, his mother, is there. And so suddenly they've declared war within the first 2 pages of the play. And Eleanor, who is known, she's going to go into battle, his mother, says this might have been prevented and made whole with very easy arguments of love, which now the manage of 2 kingdoms must with fearful bloody issue arbitrate. So you could have smoothed this over, but instead you just went off. And King John says, our strong possession and our right for us. So we have we're in our favor. We have the fact that we possess the crown and we have the right to it. And Eleanor, his mother, says, your strong possession much more than your right. But I'm only going to say that to you. I won't say that to anybody else.
Right.
So we start this, and then there are fabulous scenes that we can talk about later when they go in front of the city of Angers, and they're going to fight each other and all of that. We can talk about that later. But anyway, they end up making a peace, which by a marriage between the Dauphin of France and Blanche, who's the daughter of one of the daughters. And everything's peaceful, and then they blow it up again. And when they blow it up again, they capture Arthur. Yeah. So first, Constance is upset about the marriage that made peace, and then the Pope comes. The Pope's emissary comes, the cardinal, and we can talk about that, which is fascinating in the play.
Indeed, it is.
And then they fight, and Arthur is captured, and Constance is with King Philip and the cardinal. Pandolf, and she comes in, she's famously tearing her hair out. And the cardinal says, lady, you utter madness and not sorrow. And this is how she answers him. And we must say that this is a director reading.
Yes.
Not an actor. Thou art not wholly to belie me so. I am not mad. This hair I tear is mine. My name is Constance. I was Geoffrey's wife. Young Arthur is my son, and he is lost. I am not mad. I would to heaven I were, for then 'tis like I should forget myself. Oh, if I could, what grief should I forget? Preach some philosophy to make, and thou shalt be canonized, cardinal. For being not mad, but sensible of grief, my reasonable part produces reason how I may be delivered of these woes, and teaches me to kill or hang myself. If I were mad, I should forget my son, or madly think a babe of clouts were he. I am not mad. Too well I feel the different plague of each calamity.
Thank you. Who would know you were a director and not an actor?
All right.
Yeah, when we were like, let's do this speech, it's like, yes, one of the hardest emotional speeches in the camp. That was wonderful. Well, thank you, Evan. So a lot of people, King John's an interesting play, right? Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, King John is maybe the only eponymous king from a Shakespeare play that isn't most famously known for the Shakespeare play. Like, he's probably better known as Robin Hood's counterpart than he is as
signing the Magna Carta,
right?
Which is not in this at all.
No. Though we at least see the why the Magna Carta gets signed in this to some degree. And I think the only other argument is maybe Henry VIII with breaking from the Catholic Church and all of the wives as the only other one who might be more famous for outside of Shakespeare's plays, but it's rare. And it speaks, I think, to how rarely done this particular Shakespeare play is, which, as a perfect example, this speech that we just did is classic apex level Shakespeare, right? Like and in rereading the play for this podcast, I was constantly struck by how much of the language is apex level Shakespeare, right? Like this is Shakespeare post Romeo and Juliet, post Richard II, right before he writes Merchant of Venice and Henry IV. Like he's in one of his sweet spots. And yet we don't end up doing the play very much. And for me, when I was reading it, it felt dramaturgically difficult to me in that John is not the character I care about in the play.
True.
And therefore, the fact that John's arc is the arc that sort of completes the play then feels a little off to me. So I'm curious, as a director who's very interested in the play, what is the arc that attracts you for modern audiences, that really takes us from beginning, middle to end in this play, that speaks to you?
Yeah. Well, I think it is interesting. I mean, John doesn't talk to us.
Right.
The bastard talks to us. I mean, John says, "My mother dead." That's the only thing he says. He soliloquizes those, 3 words essentially, and so we see the swirl around him. There is a bastard character, and as the play's exploring legitimacy, and who's the rightful king, and what is a king, and what is nobility, and what is honor, and how does that relate to political power, and the Lord's support of John. They're moving to France, they're moving back to John as the winds of their fortune blow. The bastard is the character who talks to us the most, who talks about his journey, his feelings about self-interest, his horror to discover how things really are, and yet he retains love for John. So it's that last scene, John is not killed on the battlefield. He's poisoned by a monk.
Right.
I mean, it's it's like, so how are things going? The bastard says, he's been poisoned by a monk, Hubert says, and then the bastard goes, what? Who tasted his food if he was poisoned by a monk? And he goes, I told you, this monk who exploded. So the monk tasted, kamikaze, mission, kills himself, and that's how they know it was poison that did John. But at any rate, when we get to the end, we see his real son, John's real son, whom we've not heard one mention of the whole play.
No, yeah, just appears.
And he just appears, and his father's, I wish my tears could quench your pain, Father. And he says, get out of here, you're bothering me, essentially. And then the bastard comes, and that's who he feels as his son. And the bastard turns the kingdom over to Henry's son and says, there's a big patriotic speech at the end, England will never die except of a self-inflicted wound. And I know that in, certain periods that was felt as, like John of Gaunt's The Sceptred Isle speech from Richard II. But, in a period where we see a lot of self-inflicted wounds in the world, and we see those machinations that of self-interest that inflict wounds on the people, all the collateral damage in this play of battles. I find that very resonant. So sort of the consequence. I feel for me, I'm feeling the consequence of John rather than the humanity of John, which we feel Richard III. We can talk about the arranging of the murder, etc. As Richard III does, but we're seeing Richard III from the inside, and we sort of see John from the outside.
Yeah, and he doesn't feel he doesn't feel like he's evil in the same way of Richard III. Like, it feels like he truly doesn't like the idea of killing Arthur, but considers it to be a necessary political act. Like, and he thinks that very quickly and sort of instinctually. So, which I actually find is an interesting. I think it's very easy for us to go, yes, Richard III is a bad guy, because he turns to us and he goes, look at me, I'm a bad guy, and I enjoy it. But that there's actually a more sort of insidious evil almost in someone who maybe does have a moral code, but will always assume that for their own self-interest. Of like, they're aware that they're doing wrong, but it's worth it because it will let them consolidate power. Which is, it feels to me like a different kind of evil than the evil of a Richard III. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I do. I mean, I think for me, Richard has a gripe with the world and has been disrespected all his life, and no one has, and it's that appetite to get his due that moves him to all of this evil. And whereas John is a shallower guy.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the courage of any convictions except that he got this crown. And when you read the history, which is not in the play, but how he was against his father, then he was for his father, then he was for his brother and against his brother, and there's all of that back and forth stuff happening. I do think he acts rashly and out of panic, and I agree with you that he's just there and he goes, I got to get rid of this kid, and then I'm sorry that I got rid of this kid, and I didn't get rid of this kid. I'm sorry, I dissed,
Right.
that I dissed you, the murderer. So yeah, he's a centerless guy, which is what I see in the world today. People who have picked their sides and haven't thought past their side and have let go of whatever they have believed in. It's just our side has to win.
Yeah, the might is right idea.
The might is right. And yeah, and so to me, I can at least see what's driving Richard, that a human thing that's driving Richard. And I guess the thirst for power is a human thing too, but
yeah, well, it's an interesting, just the way you were just describing him right there. This is a new thought, so take it as such. But the way you were just describing him right there made me sort of think of a rat, of just like a survivalist. Like, I'm gonna, wherever the winds are blowing, I'm there. Like, even in this play where he's like, okay, are we gonna have this war with France? Or now that we've been given this nice solution where we can just marry these two people off, we're good, but then screw you, Rome, and screw you, France, but now I'm in trouble, so hi Rome, hi France.
yeah, exactly.
And then he gets killed by basically rat poison, which I actually kind of find amusing. So that's an that's an interesting distinction. That sort of, it's not, he's sort of amoral. He's both amoral and amorphous as a character.
Yes,
Tough to play.
And it's so interesting that, the top of the play, he's there with his mother.
Right. Right.
I mean,
Still.
and yeah, and it's her power. And I mean, he's ruining the country, and she's standing there silently because she can't say anything, at that moment. But, he has he has nobody until the bastard enters his life, but his mother. And then, when the mother dies, that's going to the end.
And let's talk about that, because it's an interesting, there's lots going on with both of them, but Eleanor and Constance, who can't stand each other,
Yeah.
are also, and even Blanche, though in a smaller role, she gets that wonderful speech of whose side should I be on, seem to provide the moral compass to some degree. They or at least, even when they're on different sides of it, they're both, all of them are looking at the morality a little bit more than the politics, like to what you mentioned at the top of the podcast with Eleanor saying, like, you could have just talked this out. This didn't need to be war. And Constance, while she is driving for war, is very much a mother fighting for her son. Right? Something that in general we're willing to forgive a lot of, like, well, maybe you should cool it a little bit, Constance, and not try to have a war. And it's interesting to me that you have these moral characters, and then they all either in Blanche's case just disappear, or in Constance's cases and Eleanor just die. Off stage, gone. Like, they have their scenes and then they're just gone. And it's a strange
they say
move.
Your mother, the messenger says your mother's dead. Oh, and Constance died 3 days before her. But I know this from rumor only, so I don't know.
Right. And it's like, what? I'm sorry, weren't these two like the leads of the first 3 acts? And then they're just gone. And I guess I'm now hearing, it bothered me, right? Like, reading the play, I'm bothered by that. Like, obviously it happened for all of the historical reasons that we understand. There's a reason why a lot of times the female characters are given somewhat short shrift dramaturgically, because they're played by boys and they're history plays and blah, blah, blah. But it still bothered me a little. But it is actually interesting hearing in the way you're discussing it, that if this is about like the death of morality and politics, then the fact that all of the moral characters, we can talk about the bastard, but most of the moral characters sort of die with a whimper and die off stage is maybe fits right into that in its own way.
I don't think of, to me, the moral center is, is young Arthur, and also Hubert. And Hubert, just for folks listening, if you don't, is the guy that John asked to kill Arthur. And,
yes, the paragon of morality in the play is someone who refuses to poke a child's eyes out with hot pokers. It's not a hugely high barrier, but he does get over it.
Yeah, I know, it's sad. And so I don't think that Shakespeare lets Eleanor or Constance off the hook. I mean, I don't think that I think that Eleanor's sort of, through her mothering, set up all of this competition between her sons, and that Constance, says to Arthur, if there's this marriage, where does that put you, Arthur, and where does that put me, your mother? So, although I do want to say, Constance has a similar line to Eleanor when, at the top of Act 2, when they're in front of the gates of Angiers, and Philip is there and Austria is there, and they're talking about they're going to start this war, and Constance says, hey, wait, we haven't had, the ambassador hasn't come back and said what John has said yet. Maybe we don't have to go to war. Maybe you don't have to spill this blood. So she does have that same impulse as Eleanor.
Yeah, I just found it. It's stay for an answer to your embassy, lest unadvised you stain your swords with blood. Yeah, my lord Chatillon. It continues, but yes, she is also the one who says, "Don't be rash. Let's all hold." Yeah,
exactly. So they do that, but I think I think she cares about her son, but it's her son, a king, that makes her the queen mother.
Sure.
in the same way that Eleanor is. So I think there's that operating. I did want to talk about the speech, the Constance speech,
Yes.
a bit.
Yes. Let's do it.
Because it's seen as a mad scene. I mean, she comes in literally tearing out her hair, and yet the text, as we heard, is "I am not mad."
Right.
And I think that's so important because and people, we're in audition season at Juilliard, and people come in and do the speech, and we talk about the circumstances, and they say, she's mourning the death of her son. And what is so interesting in the play is he's not dead.
No.
Yet. He's just been taken. He's going to be dead, and she's right to know that he's going to be dead. But he's not dead.
No.
He's just gone. And which doesn't diminish her, but for me, what's so interesting in that scene and what we found is if you can, she comes in saying, "I need redress. King Philip, you have done me wrong. You've betrayed me. You've gone back on your promise, and now we're friends." And went to be a friend of England, and then it wasn't until Pandolf came that we could, that you started, that you came back to me. And she says, "I want death. Death, come and take me. Death, be my friend." And they're saying, you're being histrionic. Put your hair back up. And she says, I am not mad. And so to me, I take her at her word there. She is not mad. The world is mad. Her circumstances are mad. She's powerless she's a pawn in these larger forces, which are not forces tied to any right. They're tied to power. And I mean capital R right, not right.
Yeah.
Not legal right, but moral right. And then as the more beautiful part later of grief fills the room of my absent child, I think then by the time she leaves for me, perhaps she is mad, but she enters still ready for the fight. And I have heard you say that we will see and know our friends in heaven. If that be true, I shall see my boy again. For since the birth of Cain, the first male child to him that did but yesterday suspire, there was not such a gracious creature born. But now will canker sorrow eat my bud, and chase the native beauty from his cheek, and he will look as hollow as a ghost, as dim and meager as an ague's fit, and so he'll die. And rising so again, when I shall meet him in the court of heaven, I shall not know him. Therefore never, never must I behold my pretty Arthur more. He says, you hold too heinous a respect of grief, the cardinal says. And she says, he talks to me that never had a son. And then grief fills the room of my absent child. And, by then, as she goes through that journey in the scene, she exits to her death from sorrow whenever. But I don't think she enters that way. I think she enters in rage, in frustration, in powerlessness, and she is not mad.
Right. And it's interesting that she literally goes from saying I am not mad to right before she exits, she says, I will not keep this form upon my head when there is such disorder in my wit. And I love, first of all, that for the audience, if you are not a director or an actor, what Evan just said is why Evan is a great director, which is that people tend to want to jump to the end of a scene when they are doing a scene, is going like, well, this is a mad scene. But in order for it to be a mad scene, they have to start saying. And because it's much more interesting to watch the evolution of a character, to watch them deteriorate into madness than just to paint a scene with madness. So that was fun for me to hear. And I very much agree. I mean, that speech is extremely lucid. And I was going to ask you about how much, both as a teacher and as a director, and if there's any difference, how much you engage with verse work when you're directing, or whether or not you have a speech and text person do that, like what that is in your process. But like just looking at I've also coached this speech quite a lot, and something that I always point to is that it is extremely on the meter. It's almost like she's literally using the meter to say, look, I'm not mad. I can speak exactly the right way. And this is the exact logic and reasoning of my speech, right? It's a very interesting lucidity shown both in the words and arguments she uses, but also in the verse itself, which I've always found very striking about this speech. And it makes it much more sad because you hear this as true reason, not as madness, and she has a point as from true reason, and it actually forces us to listen to it, which is rather than just kind of pay attention to histrionics. And that's it's something that I firmly agree in this speech. Like, this is a quiet, sad, real moment from a sane human, not insane person talking. How do you engage with specifically verse and language work in classical text when you're directing? And is there a difference between when you're directing a fully professional troupe or a mixed troupe like they do at Yale, for example, where you have grad students and professionals, and then a purely student group like in Juilliard? Do you adjust your treatment of this for those?
I mean, of course, yes, but no. So, I spend my preparation time looking at all the various editions of the text and look at the punctuation, and I just, I take the MIT free text online and I do my adjustments with that. Where's the period? Where's the semicolon? Where's the colon? If the lineation is different, where's the half line? Then look at my trim to cut the play generally, and then I do all of the scansion for the entire play.
Got it.
So then I've identified the irregular lines, etc. So if I'm with actors, whether they're professionals or whether they're students, if I hear something funky, or if there's a funky line, we might talk about it. And I had the privilege of doing Richard II with the great Geoffrey Carlson, who has passed away, unfortunately. But he was an amazing actor of Shakespeare, and he managed this. You didn't quite ask this, but I think it's I was noticing as I was going that somebody might critique me for making some of it prose, for not observing all the ends of the verse lines. And I think Geoffrey was someone who was wonderful about being able to get to the verse line, suspend it, but carry the thought over. And I think, that's a gift that not everyone has. And so for my taste, I'm not a take a breath at the end of every line person, but that suspension to honor the verse line and yet to honor the wraparound of the thought, and to start, when a line begins in the middle of a line, to be able to keep going, but you have to make that shift, the thought shift. So if you have to go slower on the end of this line so that you have time to make that shift, and then think faster and faster as you rehearse and rehearse, whatever that is. So when I had the opportunity to direct King John with the third year Juilliard actors in fall of 2024. And I worked with the great Andrew Wade as the vocal coach on that production.
One of the greatest.
So he was doing work with the students on his own and I was doing that work. I love being at the table and making sure that all of that all of that is clear, and that includes definitely all of the meter and all that work.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, I would say we're sort of I kind of make the delineation right at the Henry IV part two, so we're actually right on the cusp here of that strange shift that Shakespeare makes, where before that, for example, in this speech, I think every line other than two has some form of punctuation at the end of the line. And then after, like, starting in the Henry IVs, there's that strange shift he makes where suddenly much more punctuation is in the middle of the line and much less is at the end of the line. And we could get into the theory of why that happened and everything. But it is interesting what you're talking about this sort of the coinage or suspension at the end, or the intrusion after a midline caesura is fascinating. I'm glad to hear that you like that too, because it's definitely I don't think of myself as being verse obsessed, but I weirdly am quite persnickety about that stuff. And trying to help people find the ability to, like, see that as a help and not a hindrance, not some rule that you have to do, but a tool that helps you find truth in the text. Yeah. And the other just straight up verse tool that I see in this one, at least at the beginning, and I'm curious if it's something that you follow or not, is sort of the idea of, if it's a lot of single syllabic words, they're taking their time. Which I also think is somewhat a chicken or egg thing. It's like, if you're saying 10 words instead of 3 in a verse line, it's going to take you longer anyway. But I do find it interesting in this speech that it's not histrionic. It really is, I am not mad. I would to heaven I were. For then 'tis like I should forget myself. Oh, if I could, what grief should I forget? And the only double syllabics in there are the word forget, which is fascinating.
Right. Yeah.
So very, very
and the
interesting.
top, that thou art not, we've got holy to belie, you've got those, but this hair I tear is mine.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you literally feel her going, look, I'm not crazy. It's
Exactly.
literally telling you how to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
that's real grief, right? This is, I'm sure you deal with this in auditions all the time, is people with real grief aren't screaming and histrionic. People with real grief are working really, really hard to still make sense of their grief and make sense to people. Like, it's that effort that actually makes us feel the truth of it. It's not them weeping more than the next person walking into the room. It's actually watching them try not to weep. So this has always felt like one of those speeches to me. Yeah. So can I ask you a question moving off? Do you have anything more to say about this speech? Because I have a question about a different element of the play.
No, just all day we could talk. But
yeah, I mean, gosh, we could just nerd out about verse for the rest of the game, and but we won't, because especially because the audience has at least heard my side of that a few times already, and I'm aware of it. But then I get excited when you do your side. I can't help but do mine, and here we go. The Bastard. So you've talked about him a little bit, and I actually found what you were talking about with the end of the play very interesting, because on just the most recent read, I didn't pick up on some of what you were talking about how, like, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, about how there actually seems to be a bit of a choice on the Bastard side as this sort of very powerful, charismatic figure to hand power without any self-interest, to hand power to the young prince at the end of the play, rather than go, well, geez, most of my army just got drowned in a flood, but I'm still the most powerful military force in England. Why don't I be king? Like, that it's actually a very interesting, he chooses country over power. Was that kind of what you were speaking to there?
Yeah. He's now I'm reading from the book instead of the thing, but I mean, one of the most moving moments is King John dies, and then the Bastard says, "Okay, let's go. We're going to go fight France some more." And Salisbury says, "Oh, you don't know? The Cardinal, Pandolf came, and they've made a peace with the Dauphin because his stuff was racked as well, and And then the bastard said, "Let it be so." He said, "Let's fight, 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 fight." And then he says, "Let it be so. And you, my noble prince, with other princes, let's talk about things." And then he says, we'll bury him. "And happily may your sweet self put on the lineal state and glory of the land, to whom, with all submission on my knee, I do bequeath my faithful services and true subjection everlastingly." And he kneels. And then the lords kneel. And then there is the peaceful transfer of power.
Right.
And
Right.
that could have gone a different way.
Yeah, and it read, now it's so clear when you say it like that, but it was funny that I sort of missed on my most recent read that there is probably a moment, a dramatic moment where he makes the decision, probably on Let It Be So, as you say, where he makes the decision to not pursue power and not pursue war and allow peace to reign, which that actually is a much more satisfying ending than how it sort of read on at first blush on the page. Mm-hmm. So thank you for spelling that out. It's a very interesting character to me, and it does bring up this, as we talk about, it is interesting that it's just something I'm hearing, that both militaries get completely eviscerated by the weather. It's another element of like nature, sort of this question of nature and what is nature and what is human and what isn't, and nature kind of going in and being like, actually, both of your armies are drowned. Try again, reset. You know how you were expecting a whole bunch of more men and provisions? Nah, they're dead. You know how you were expecting an army to get through the swamp? Nah, they're dead. Which is an interesting, and obviously Shakespeare has used nature in many of his plays as a force for various different things. But it's just, I was hearing that for that first time, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Nature plays a course here. So the bastard is weird to me, and I'll tell you why he's weird to me. And maybe you can help. Is he unique in Shakespeare's canon as a leading role in a history who's totally fictional?
He may be. I can't think of another one.
Yeah, it's because I found myself, I was like, why is he funky to me? And it's because every single person that he's engaging with is a real historical figure. But he isn't. Yeah. He's completely made up. And I think in some ways it's maybe part of the reason why we're all so attracted to him is that's like, we're used to that from historical fiction. We're used to that from Sharp, Hornblower, whatever the series you want to call it, Patrick O'Brien's. But they're normally not. They normally don't exist in history plays, and I find it to be an interesting, weird walk for Shakespeare to be taking with him, and like to have a character of that level of power in a play that is, at least to some degree, has to be propaganda, because all of the plays of the era had to be propaganda to some degree. Right. And I just found myself wondering why he chose to create this completely fictional character, and from a pure propaganda purpose, and maybe this is why I missed the actual human drama that you did. I was like, well, of course they need the bastard to be like, yeah, no, I don't want any power, I'm good, because otherwise all of these people watching the crowd are going to be like, well, who is this bastard? Who comes down from him? But I just found him unique dramaturgically in that way, because I was shocked when I realized he was totally fictional. I thought he was probably built on someone, but he's not.
Yeah.
He feels like a character out of one of the tragedies more than history, which I wonder if it feels a little too early for Shakespeare to have been messing with form that much. But I guess I don't know how much Shakespeare's audiences would have been confused by that if it was breaking a form.
That's really interesting.
And I also wondered if he was like a progenitor to like Falstaff, who is a historical figure, but quite a small one. But this idea of entering this fan favorite somewhat fictional character to give the audience a way in to what is otherwise a very sort of highfalutin political drama, is you get this everyman character. That's the only commonality I see between them, is they both offer a way for the everyman in the audience to observe politics through this character. And I found, especially with the path of the plays, I wondered if he was sort of a first draft of what then became Falstaff.
I think that's really interesting. I had never thought of that, but yeah, I mean, it's so interesting in the play, because you have that scene that we talked, the top scene where Chatillon is coming in, and and then okay, war, 2 pages, and then there's this domestic drama about the bastard's younger brother wants his land, their father's land,
right.
And the bastard has to renounce Robert Falconbridge as his father for the suggestion that he's Coeur de Lion's son. So, and just in terms of real estate, that's a long scene, and then the mother comes on, and that, I mean, talk about women in the play.
Yeah.
So the mother who was forced to lie down with the king,
right,
who's been keeping the secret so as not to be disgraced for all these years, and the son says, I'd rather be the bastard son of the king than the son to this guy that I've been living as the son of all my life. It's pretty amazing. And then he sees all this stuff at he sees how the kings behave. He sees how manipulable they are. And I did want to talk maybe just briefly just about the citizens of Angiers, because Act 2, the 2 armies come, plus Austria's army, and they say, recognize the king. And the king says, and the citizens, these little citizens, and there's the wonderful line, the bastard says, these scroyles of Angiers flout you kings, and stand securely on their battlements as in a theater, whence they gape and point at your industrious scenes and acts of death. So the citizens say, we'll let in the rightful king when we figure out who the rightful king is. And talk about collateral damage. Then they go, and off stage for a couple of minutes, they fight and slaughter Frenchmen and Englishmen, and they come back and they say, hey, I won, and the other one says, no, I won, and they say, well, it looks like you lost. I mean, so all of those men are dead so that these guys will open the gate to their city. I mean, it's like the casualness with which we can push a button and destroy a whole city, or they destroy all of that, and then they come back and say, who's the king? And they say, we don't know. And then the bastard comes up with this fantastic idea of, why don't they first just kill everybody in Angiers, and then they can figure out who's the king of it, which we see over and over in our lives. Let's destroy the country, and then we'll pay to build it back up. I mean, many examples. And then the citizens have the idea of the marriage.
Right.
The citizens have the idea of making peace. And that's when, and they make peace. And that's when the bastard sees that there's no such thing as moral right for these guys. France doesn't care about Arthur.
No.
John gives all, I mean, it is so fantastic. John, to stop Arthur's title in the whole, hath willingly departed with a part. He gives all of those territories that on page 1 the French asked. He gives them
dowry
to France in the marriage dowry. So there's nothing. So I'm getting back to the bastard, but he sees all of this and he goes, okay, I see how the world works. I'm going to work this way. And then he becomes a messenger, and he fights, and he kills Austria, who killed his daddy, Richard the Lionhearted. All of that stuff. He goes on this, and then there's something that happens when he sees Arthur's Arthur's dead body. Spoiler alert. So Arthur is not killed by Hubert. As you say, he doesn't go that thing, but then he tries to escape and he falls off the walls and he dies. And they see his body and he goes, oh my God. The loss of Arthur starts this perception shift in the bastard that there's something not right in all of this. It is not right. And I think that there's something when he sees the young prince at the end, that there's some connection.
It is an interesting point because up to that, I found that moment jarring in when I was working through it because up until that point, he actually seems sort of less interested in what is right or wrong and more kind of a bold, brash, like if he's a Dungeons and Dragons character, he's like a chaotic neutral rogue, right? He's not really evil, he's very charming, he's every Harrison Ford character ever. He's he's just a fun, like, and he even the commodity stuff, he's like, this is nuts, but also, okay, I guess this is what we do now, right? Like, he's not like, this is bad. He's just very clear-eyed about it and then goes, I guess this is how the world works. But you're right that then Arthur, then he dies and the bastard is like, whoa, this is too far. And it's interesting seeing that he finds his morality, and I guess at a good time, because as you say, I love the idea that there's a connection between that scene and that prince at the end, where I guess he knows that if he was going to try to seize power, he would have to kill this kid. And he's seen what that looks like, and he doesn't want anything to do with that. That's a cool transition. Because he's such a chaos monger that scene between him and Austria is one of the funniest scenes and one of the most contemporary, like, it's so contemporary, that type of comedy, where he's like, oh, if a man called me this, and then the bastard calls him that multiple times and just calls his bluff on it. And then the next time we see him, he's got his head in his hands, and it's an extraordinary comedy, but it's a comedy of a chaotic figure, not of a actual nation builder or moralist. And yet by the end of the play, he has morality.
Can I read a little bit of that?
Please.
His speech at Arthur's body. He says to go bear him in thine arms. They take the boy's body. I am amazed, methinks, and lose my way among the thorns and dangers of this world. How easy dost thou take all England up. From forth this morsel of dead royalty, the life, the right, and truth of all this realm is fled to heaven. And England now is left to tug and scamble and depart by the teeth the unowned interest of proud swelling state. Now powers from home and discontents at home meet in one line, and vast confusion waits. And then he goes, now bear away the child out to the king. I got to do 1,000 businesses. And heaven itself doth frown upon the land. I mean, he's
seeing it.
He's seeing it, and he still has to fight, and he still has to this, and he's still, but something's different.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting, you don't want to draw too many direct parallels to what's going on in the world today and in our nation today, but it is interesting, like, sometimes what we have seen a couple of politicians who maybe went to gain their power out of just a desire to have power, but have since seen, like, holy cow, this is destructive, and have actually had crises of conscience. We've also seen a lot go the other way, unfortunately, but
not enough. Not enough have had that that term.
But you've seen a few. And I
think Salisbury, and they ultimately go back to John because the French are going to kill them, but but Salisbury, we didn't do all of it, but Salisbury has that huge speech about how it just pains me that we're, going against our own country and fighting with the French.
Right.
And the Dauphin says, just be quiet, I'll give you some lands. It's like, all right already with the England stuff. That's right before that wonderful speech, I will not back.
Yes, well, and it is an interesting, are there any other plays of Shakespeare where the French are written so intelligently?
Yeah.
Because he usually writes them as like, you kind of have
Right.
to overcome the quasi joke of the French if you don't want to lean into it. But in this one, they're not jokes. I mean, the Dauphin he's like a Malcolm Octavius level political operator. He's like, he strikes you as like an extraordinarily dangerous human, right? And it's just interesting to me. I think it's one of maybe it's old enough history that he can get away with writing the French more serious. But then again, he made a joke out of Joan of Arc, or not a joke, but he made her a devil worshiper.
Yeah.
And obviously the French in Henry V are somewhat laughable. You can adjust it, but written on the page, they're somewhat laughable. So I do find this to also be a strange exception to that rule, because the French aren't. And Philip is that sort of moral quandary that Philip finds himself in when he's like, I literally just shook hands with this king, and now the Roman Catholic Church is telling me this. Those are real speeches and real human issues.
Yes.
It's just fascinating that he was able to get away with that in this play. Yeah, maybe if you follow the bloodlines, there's some bloodline among those French that connect to Elizabeth, so it was okay to show them seriously or something. Hard to say, but I find the play very interesting in that way, because it has so many of these little things that feel, frankly, quite unlike a lot of the rest of Shakespeare's histories. It feels like it's in a little bit of a separate category in a way that I'm having trouble locking into, but was striking to me as I was reading it. Well, I've already taken up too much of your time. Is there anything else, any other thoughts that you had about John that you wanted to share before we took off today?
Just, I love the play. I really think it is resonant for our times. I would encourage anybody who hasn't read it or hasn't read it in a long time to take another look at it. It's also got, just delicious roles for actors. So amazing, and I love its quirks, and I think I just think it's very resonant for our time. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Thank you for letting me revisit it.
Of course. Thank you for agreeing to come onto the podcast and talk about it, and giving me an excuse to revisit this play, because it's not, I know the Scottish play pretty well at this point. It's fun to get to dig into one of the lesser performed ones. So this has been a real blast for me. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you everybody for listening. Once again, my name is Nathan Winkelstein. I was your host, and my wonderful guest was Evan Yionoulis, and our revels now are ended.
Thanks for tuning in to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your support helps us to bring you more captivating conversations and insights into the world of classic theater. To stay updated on our latest activities, follow us on social media, get on our mailing list, and visit www.redbulltheater.com, where you'll find an abundance of podcasts, readings, classes, seminars, productions, and more. Your support makes all of this possible, so please consider making a tax-deductible donation on our website to help us continue bringing classical theater to contemporary audiences. Until next time, thanks, and ever thanks.